A grounded flight strands them together for one unforgettable night. No last names, no promises, just a fireplace, a game of cards, and a truth she'll never forget. Then he vanishes before dawn. 5 months later, compliance auditor Toby Grant walks into a boardroom to investigate a shipping empire's falsified safety records, and comes face to face with Daniel, who isn't Daniel at all. He's Johan G., heir to the very company she's been sent to expose. As Toby digs deeper, she uncovers a betrayal far more calculated than either of them imagined. One hiding behind 26 years of trust. To find the truth, she'll have to risk her career, her safety, and her heart on a man who once vanished without a word. Grab your popcorn. Let's get started. Tobiloba Grant had promised herself she would not cry on this flight. She had cried in the airport bathroom in Atlanta, twice. Once folding the letter her ex-fiancé Preston had left in her mailbox instead of saying it to her face, and once because the bathroom attendant had asked if she was all right and something about a stranger's kindness always broke her faster than a stranger's cruelty. But not on the plane. Not in front of people. She had a rule about that. She was 31,000 feet over the Georgia Hill country, her sister's wedding 4 days away, a bridesmaid dress zipped in a garment bag above her head, when the pilot's voice came over the intercom sounding too calm in the specific way pilots sound when something is wrong. Folks, we've got an indicator light we need to have looked at before we continue to Atlanta. Out of an abundance of caution, we're going to divert to the nearest regional airport. Should be on the ground in about 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Toby gripped the armrest and did the math her body always did in moments like this. 6 minutes was nothing. 6 minutes was an eternity. 6 minutes was exactly as long as it took to decide whether your life was about to change. Next to her, a man closed his laptop without being asked to, and said quietly, not to her exactly but into the 6 minutes they now shared. It's always the middle of nowhere ones that get you. She looked at him properly for the first time. Korean, maybe 30, an undercut grown out just enough to look deliberate. A single silver hoop in one ear, a gray wool coat too fine for economy class. He had the stillness of someone used to bad news, not unbothered, just practiced. You fly a lot? She asked, because talking felt better than gripping the armrest in silence. Enough to know 6 minutes is usually fine, he said. Statistically. Comforting. I try. A small, real smile. I'm Daniel. Toby. She didn't offer a last name. He didn't ask for one. 6 minutes, she thought, was exactly long enough to become someone's temporary friend and nothing more. The landing, when it came, was smooth and almost anticlimactic. Tires on tarmac, the collective exhale of 80 strangers, a scattering of applause from the back of the plane the way people always clap for pilots doing their jobs correctly. Through the window, Toby saw a 2-gate airport, a single runway dusted with early snow nobody had forecast, a terminal with a hand-lettered sign that read Welcome to Candor Regional. Candor, Daniel said, reading it over her shoulder. As in the town, presumably. Not a promise. Let's hope it's both, Toby said, and didn't know yet how true that would turn out to be. The airline's apology came in the form of a harried gate agent, a stack of vouchers, and the news that the next flight out, any flight out, was not until tomorrow afternoon. Candor, Georgia, it turned out, had one hotel. The Magnolia Inn, 11 rooms, a fireplace in the lobby, and an owner named Miss Odell who treated the sudden arrival of 10 stranded travelers like a dinner party she'd been meaning to throw. Y'all picked a fine night to get grounded, she said, handing out keys. Snow's not stopping till morning. Kitchen's open till 9 if anybody's hungry. And after that there's a bottle of my sister's blackberry wine I don't mind sharing. Toby took her key, room 6, and found herself, an hour later, unable to sleep, unable to stop replaying the letter Preston had left, walking the creaking hallway down to the lobby, where the fireplace was still going and Daniel was sitting in one of the wingback chairs with 2 mugs of something steaming. I made too much, he said, before she could apologize for interrupting. Miss Odell's orders. Cocoa or cider, I genuinely don't know which. Sit. She sat. You looked like you were running from something up in your room, he said. not unkindly. I recognized the walk. That obvious? Only to someone doing the same thing. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Outside, snow fell sideways past the window in a way that made the whole grounded night feel like it was happening outside of real time. A pocket cut out of her actual life, where nobody knew her, nobody needed anything from her, and she could say true things to a stranger because a stranger couldn't use them against her later. My fiancé left me a letter, she said. Not even in person. In the mailbox like a bill. I'm supposed to be a bridesmaid in 4 days and I don't know how to stand up there and be happy for my sister when I feel like... She stopped. Like the ground moved and nobody told you, Daniel finished. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment, turning his mug in his hands. I know that feeling. I'm supposed to be somewhere too, right now, doing something I'm not ready to do. I got on a plane instead of dealing with it. Bought a ticket to nowhere in particular. This detour is the first time in 3 weeks I haven't felt like I was being watched. Who's watching you? Something crossed his face. Not quite fear, closer to fatigue. People I used to trust. It's complicated. Family business in the worst sense of both words. You don't have to tell me. I know, he said. That's exactly why I want to. They didn't tell each other everything. That was the strange grace of it. The not knowing became its own kind of intimacy. Two people handing each other the parts of themselves that didn't have names or companies or family trees attached. Just the truth underneath. Around midnight, Miss Odell's kitchen long closed. Daniel produced a deck of cards from his coat pocket for emergencies. He said, and taught Toby a Korean card game called Go Stop with rules so specific and so clearly beloved that she started laughing before she understood a single one of them. You're making half of this up? She accused, watching him sweep a hand of cards toward himself with theatrical smugness. I would never lie about Go Stop. Everything else, negotiable. Go Stop is sacred. So there is a hierarchy of things you'd lie about. He went still for half a second and she almost missed it, almost if she hadn't spent the last 2 years of her career learning to notice the half second where people decided how much of the truth to give you. There's a version of me that exists so that another version of me doesn't have to answer for things, he said finally. Tonight, I'd like to just be the card game version, if that's all right. Deal, she said, and meant the pun and the permission both. Somewhere around one, the conversation drifted somewhere neither of them had planned it to go. Toby found herself describing the exact shade of blue her mother had painted the porch 3 summers running, chasing a color she could picture but never mix. Daniel found himself describing, without quite meaning to, the sound his father's voice made on the last phone call before the accident, a detail he said he'd never told anyone outside his family. Neither of them apologized for how much they were giving away. It was easier, somehow, to hand a stranger the heaviest things. There was no history to protect, no reputation the truth could damage, only the fire and the snow and the particular honesty that comes from knowing you will likely never see this person again. I don't usually do this, Toby admitted, watching the flames. Tell people things. I audit for a living. I spend my whole professional life deciding what other people are allowed to hide. I'm not used to being the one who's transparent. Maybe that's why it's working, Daniel said. You've spent your whole career learning what honesty costs other people. Tonight you get to spend it for free. At 2 a.m, Miss Odell found them still at the lobby table, cards abandoned, talking instead about the towns they'd grown up in. His outside Busan, a house with a persimmon tree his grandmother refused to let anyone else touch. Hers in a suburb of Charlotte, a street where every house had the same floor plan and her mother had spent 30 years trying to make theirs look like nobody else's. Lord, you two are still up? Miss Odell said, not unkindly, switching off the tall lamp by the window. Snow's letting up. They'll probably get that plane sorted by 10. Get some sleep, whatever's left of it. Toby stood, suddenly aware of how close they drifted over 3 hours of low talk. Knees almost touching, the fire down to embers. Daniel stood too, and for a moment neither of them moved toward the stairs. Thank you, he said, for 6 minutes that turned into this. Technically it was closer to 9 hours. I round generously. He almost reached for her hand and didn't. "Good night, Toby." "Good night, Daniel." She didn't know, climbing the stairs to room 6, that it was the last time she would hear that name and believe it. She woke at 7 to gray light and an empty hallway, and told herself the unease in her chest was nothing. He was probably at breakfast, probably packing, probably exactly where a person is supposed to be the morning after a snowstorm strands 10 strangers together. He was not at breakfast. "Checked out before dawn," Miss Odell said, refilling Toby's coffee with the particular gentleness of a woman who had seen this exact expression on a guest's face before. "Paid cash, asked me to call him a car to the next county over. Regional puddle jumper leaves out of Millbrook, apparently earlier than the airline's flight. Left in an awful hurry, that one. Didn't seem like the leaving in a hurry type, if you ask me, but I didn't ask him. Did he leave anything?" "Just this." Miss Odell produced a folded cocktail napkin from behind the register, one of the magnolias, embossed with a little magnolia blossom in the corner. On it, in handwriting too careful to be careless, 3 words. "I'm sorry, Daniel." No number, no last name, no explanation that meant anything. Toby sat with the napkin in her lap through her own delayed flight back to Atlanta, through her sister's rehearsal dinner 2 nights later where she smiled in all the right places, through the wedding itself where she caught the garter toss with a reflexive hand and felt nothing, and told herself, the way she told herself about Preston, that this was simply what happened to her, that she was the kind of woman men left notes for instead of goodbyes. She put the napkin in the drawer of her nightstand and could not, throw it away. Corporate compliance audit work did not leave much room for heartbreak, which was, Toby had decided, its chief virtue. By the time 5 months had passed, she had closed out 3 cases, gotten a modest promotion to senior auditor at Castellano and Wren Compliance Partners, and mostly stopped checking her phone for a number that had never existed in it. Mostly. Toby. Diane Castellano, the firm's managing partner, appeared in the doorway of Toby's office on a Tuesday in March with the particular brightness she reserved for either very good news or very difficult clients. "Conference room. Now if you can." The case brief on the screen made Toby's stomach drop before she'd even read the client name. G Group Shipping and Logistics Division. Third-party compliance audit requested by the board following an anonymous whistleblower complaint alleging falsified safety inspection records across at least 4 cargo vessels. "It's a big one," Diane said, sliding a folder across the table. "Publicly traded, family-controlled, half the Pacific trade routes running through their fleet. If there's falsified safety data, we're not just talking fines, we're talking a criminal referral. I want you leading it. You've got the sharpest eye on the team for buried numbers. When do I start?" "Monday. You'll be embedded at their Atlanta regional office. Apparently that's where the falsified inspections originated. Full access to records, full cooperation from leadership, or so they claim." Diane's mouth twisted. The specific skepticism of a woman who had heard full cooperation promised before. Find out if that's true. Toby drove home that night thinking about cargo manifests and inspection logs, not about persimmon trees or ghost stop or a cocktail napkin in her nightstand drawer. She had, after all, gotten very good at not thinking about that. She had no way of knowing that the name at the top of G Group's executive roster, chairman's son, vice president of fleet operations, 30 years old, was about to make the not thinking considerably harder. The G Group's Atlanta regional office occupied 11 floors of glass tower downtown. A scale model of a container ship in the lobby lit from beneath like something sacred. Toby badged in on Monday morning with her firm's credentials, a laptop bag, and the particular armor she wore into every new engagement. Blazer pressed, questions ready, nothing about her posture inviting small talk. She was 3 hours into reviewing the previous year's inspection logs, cross-referencing dates, signatures, port authority stamps, when she found the first inconsistency. A vessel logged as inspected and cleared in Savannah on a date when, according to the Port Authority's own public shipping records, it had still been docked in Busan. She was still staring at the discrepancy, cursor hovering, when the conference room door opened and a voice she had spent 5 months failing to forget said, "I heard we had auditors in the building." I didn't realize they'd assigned our best one. She looked up. He looked different in a suit, sharper, more armored, the undercut trimmed close, the single ear piercing, the only thing left of the man who'd taught her a card game at 2 in the morning. But it was him. It was unmistakably, impossibly him. Daniel, she said, and heard how strange the name sounded now, like a costume someone had forgotten to take off. Actually, he said, and something in his face was already braced for what came next. It's Johan. Johan G. The conference room emptied itself of everyone else within 30 seconds. Johan's doing? A short sentence in Korean to his assistant, and then, in English, "Give us the room, please." And then it was just the two of them and a table between them stacked with the falsified logs Toby had spent all morning finding. "Vice President of Fleet Operations," she said. "That's an interesting detail to leave out over Coco. I left out my whole name, Toby. I wasn't selective about it." He sat, finally, across from her, and the ease he'd had in candor was gone, replaced by something more careful. "I'm not going to insult you by pretending I don't know why you're here." "Then don't. Tell me what you know about Vessel 4106 being logged as inspected in Savannah on a date it was docked 6,000 miles away." Something flickered across his face. Recognition, and beneath it, relief, oddly. "I know it's real. I found it myself 4 months ago. I've been trying to get someone to take it seriously since November." "You found it?" "I found 3 of them. I brought it to our compliance director, who told me it was a clerical error being corrected. I brought it to the board audit committee, who told me the same thing with more words. I brought it to the one person I trusted most in this company." He stopped. And I was told very gently that if I kept pushing, I'd be the one who looked like he had something to hide. Founder's son making noise about safety violations right before a fleet expansion vote. Bad optics, I was told. Best to let the internal review handle it quietly. His jaw tightened. So I got on a plane instead. I told myself I was going to Seattle to think. I ended up on your flight instead, because it was the next one leaving, and I have never been more grateful for a mechanical failure in my life. "So the anonymous whistleblower was me," he said. "I filed it through counsel, through an intermediary the week after candor. I couldn't get anyone inside the company to listen, so I went outside it. I didn't know your firm would assign you. I promise you that." Toby sat back, the cocktail napkins 3 words rearranging themselves in her memory into something almost forgivable. Almost. "You let me think you left because you didn't want this," she said quietly. "Whatever this was. I left because I was terrified of what would happen to anyone standing next to me once this became public." Johan said. "I still am. That's not an excuse. It's just true. If Johan G was the wound at the center of G Group, Paul Ha was its steady hand, or so 11 floors of employees believed. Executive Director of Fleet Operations. A company man for 26 years, the person who had, by his own frequent telling, raised Johan up, after the old chairman's fatal heart attack left a 22-year-old heir with a fleet and no idea how to run it. He found Toby on her second day, in the break room on the 9th floor, and introduced himself with a warmth so practiced it took her a full week to notice how little of it reached his eyes. "Ms. Grant, I hope the team's been giving you everything you need." His accent carried the particular polish of a man who had spent decades in rooms where polish mattered. "I'll be candid with you. Johan's told me the 2 of you are already acquainted. Small world." "Small enough," Toby said carefully. "He's a good boy," Ha said, and something about the phrase, "good boy," for a 30-year-old vice president, sat wrong in her chest before she could articulate why. "Bright, impatient. He came to me with concerns about the inspection logs a while back, and I want you to know I took every one of them seriously. Ordered an internal review myself. These things take time to do properly. You understand better than anyone, I imagine, how easy it is to see smoke and assume fire before the facts are in. I generally find," Toby said, "that where there's this much smoke, it's worth checking the fire department's records too." Ha's smile didn't waver, but something behind it recalibrated. Of course. That's precisely why we brought your firm in. Full cooperation, Ms. Grant. Anything you need. He left her a business card and the distinct, unshakable impression of a man measuring exactly how much of a problem she was going to be. The tip that cracked the pattern open came from an unlikely source. Rin Jiang, a junior data analyst in the fleet operations department who cornered Toby in the stairwell on her 4th day. Glancing over her shoulder like the walls themselves, reported to Paul Ha. I'm not supposed to talk to auditors directly, Rin said, voice low. But I've been flagging inconsistencies in the Halcyon Marine invoices for 8 months. Every time I send them up the chain, they come back marked resolved with no explanation attached. I stopped sending them. I started saving them instead. She held out a small drive, hands shaking slightly. I don't know what's on all of it. I know it's not nothing. Why give this to me and not Johan? Toby asked. Because Mr. G still reports on paper to Director Ha, Rin said. And because you're the only person in this building whose job depends on the truth being inconvenient for somebody. Toby took the drive home that night and found, buried in 8 months of Rin's careful flagging, the first thread of the Halcyon shell structure, 3 invoices routed through an intermediary account whose only other transaction months earlier had been a wire transfer to a title company in Hilton Head. It was the loose thread that, once pulled, unraveled Paul Ha's 26 years of careful patience in a matter of weeks. Johan found her that night, long after the 9th floor had emptied, still cross-referencing shipping manifests against Port Authority records with the particular single-mindedness that had made her the best auditor at her firm. You should go home, he said, setting down 2 coffees. Real coffee this time, not cocoa, but the gesture unmistakably the same one from the Magnolia's fireplace. I found the pattern, she said, not looking up. It's not random clerical error. Every falsified inspection traces back to the same 3 vessels, and every one of those vessels is under a maintenance contract with the same third-party inspection firm, Halcyon Marine Services. And Halcyon's registered agent, according to Georgia's Secretary of State filings, is a shell corporation whose only other listed asset is a beach house in Hilton Head. She finally looked up at him. Owned until 18 months ago by Paul Ha. Johan went very still. He sold it, Toby continued. The same month Halcyon won the inspection contract for your fleet, for roughly triple its assessed value, to a buyer whose LLC dissolved 4 months later. That's not a clerical error, Johan said quietly. That's a kickback. That's what it looks like from here. I need more before I can put it in a report, bank records, the actual buyer's identity, confirmation the money traces back to Halcyon. But Johan, she hesitated, weighing how much to say. The man who told you to let the internal review handle it quietly. That's not protecting the company. That's protecting himself. Johan sat down slowly across from her, the same posture as the boardroom 5 days earlier, except this time something in him had cracked open past the careful VP composure. He taught me everything, he said. How to read a balance sheet. How to fire someone with dignity. How to survive a board meeting where half the room wanted my father's company handed to a more experienced outsider instead of a grieving 22-year-old. I trusted him more than I trusted my own family, because he was the only one who never once made me feel like I was drowning. I know, Toby said. That's exactly why it worked. The warning came 3 days later, in the form of a manila envelope left on Toby's desk with no return address, containing a single photograph, she and Johan, in the Magnolia Inn's lobby at the card table from 5 months and 140 miles ago. Someone had been there. Someone had been watching, even then, even before either of them knew what the other one was. Scrawled on the back, in block letters, some audits aren't worth finishing. She brought it straight to Diane, who went pale reading it, and to Johan, whose hands, she noticed, were shaking slightly by the time he set the photo down. He's known since Candor, Johan said. Or he's had someone watching me since before that. Either way, this isn't a warning about the audit. This is a warning about you specifically. He knows exactly what leverage he has. Then we stop being careful about being careful, Toby said, surprising herself with how steady her voice came out. I'm not walking away from a kickback scheme because someone left a photo on my desk. But I do need you to understand, if this escalates, it's not just your career on the line. It's mine. My license. Possibly my safety. I understand completely, Johan said. Which is why I need to tell you something I should have told you the moment I found out you were leading this audit. He met her eyes. I've started keeping my own file. Everything Has ever told me not to worry about. Emails, meeting notes, a recording from the board meeting where he suggested I take a leave of absence for my own good right before you arrived. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I think I know now. The break-in happened 4 nights after the photograph. Clean, professional, nothing broken. Toby came home from a late session at the office to find her apartment exactly as she'd left it, except for the thin manila folder of preliminary notes she'd kept, out of habit, in the bottom drawer of her desk instead of on the firm's servers. Gone. Nothing else touched. Not her laptop, not the jewelry box on her dresser, not the cocktail napkin still folded in her nightstand, which struck her later as its own kind of message. Whoever had done this hadn't been interested in anything of hers except the one thing that could hurt Ha. She called the police, who took a report and found no sign of forced entry, which frightened her more than broken glass would have. She called Johan, who arrived within the hour, still in the suit he'd worn to a board dinner, his composure fraying in a way she hadn't seen since the boardroom. "This is my fault," he said, standing in her kitchen while she made tea neither of them would drink. "I should never have let you keep hard copies. I should have insisted." "You don't get to make this about guilt," Toby said, more sharply than she meant to. "This is about the fact that a man with 26 years of institutional trust just proved he's willing to break into an auditor's home. That's not a warning anymore, Johan. That's evidence of exactly how far he's willing to go, and I intend to use it." She didn't sleep at her apartment again until the case closed. Johan didn't ask her to stay somewhere else. He simply showed up with a duffel bag and slept on her couch for a week, an old-fashioned kind of protection that asked nothing of her except permission, and she found, to her own surprise, that she wanted to give it. It took another 6 weeks, careful and quiet, for the full shape of it to surface. Toby working the paper trail during the day, cross-checking every falsified log against Halcyon's inspection reports and the actual Port Authority records. Johan, after hours, pulling internal financial records he had access to as VP but had never thought to question until now. What emerged was a scheme built with real patience. Paul Ha had spent 4 years quietly steering the fleet's inspection contracts toward Halcyon Marine Services, a firm he'd secretly controlled through 2 layers of shell ownership, falsifying safety clearances on aging vessels to save the company millions in mandated repairs. Repairs Ha then billed separately, through a second shell company, as emergency maintenance, pocketing the difference on both ends. When Johan started asking questions in the fall, Ha hadn't panicked. He'd simply started building a narrative, quiet meetings with board members, gentle suggestions that grief and inexperience were making the young VP paranoid. A slow campaign to make Johan's competence itself the thing in question, so that whenever the falsified logs did surface, nobody would believe the alarm was coming from anywhere but instability. "He wasn't planning to frame you for the falsification," Toby said, laying it all out across her apartment's kitchen table one night in April. String and printouts and bank records spread like a crime board neither of them had expected their lives to require. He was planning something worse. He was going to let it come out eventually, on his terms, timed to a moment when you looked unstable enough that the board would believe you'd either caused it or covered it up trying to protect the company's reputation. Either way, you're the one who takes the fall, and he's the trusted elder statesman who discovers the fraud and cleans it up. He probably already has a successor in mind. "My cousin," Johan said grimly. "He's been unusually warm to my cousin lately. I thought it was politics. I think now it might have been succession planning." Toby looked up from the printouts. "This is enough. Not for a courtroom yet, but enough for my report. I have to file it Monday, Johan. Once I do, I don't control what happens to it." "Then file it," Johan said. "I'm done protecting a man who was never protecting me." Diane Castellano called Toby into her office on Friday afternoon, and the moment Toby saw her partner's face, she knew something had shifted beneath her without warning. I got a call this morning, Diane said carefully, from someone on G Group's board. Off the record, very friendly, very concerned about our firm's reputation for, his words, measured professional audits that don't get ahead of themselves. He suggested that a junior auditor's personal entanglement with a company executive might be clouding this particular engagement's objectivity. He suggested it might be wiser to reassign the case before Monday's filing. Toby felt the floor tilt. Diane, that report is airtight. I have bank records. I know what you have, Toby. You've shown me every document. Diane's voice was tight. But this firm survives on relationships with exactly the kind of board members who make calls like that one, and I would be lying if I said there wasn't pressure on me right now to make this go away quietly. Are you telling me to bury it? The silence that followed lasted long enough that Toby's stomach had already answered the question before Diane did. I'm telling you, Diane said finally, that I need to think about this over the weekend, and I'm telling you that whatever I decide, I need you to understand that I have 30 years and 40 employees riding on the decisions I make about which fights this firm can survive. Toby walked out of that office and, for the first time since candor, felt the specific fury of watching someone she'd respected choose comfort over truth. The same fury, she realized with a jolt, that Johan must have felt every single day for the past 6 months, alone. She didn't call Johan that night. She sat with it alone. The way she'd always handled the moments that mattered most, turning the choice over like a stone in her palm. She thought about Preston's letter in the mailbox, about the version of herself that had spent months believing she was simply the kind of woman things happened to. She thought about the cocktail napkin still folded in her nightstand drawer. 3 words that had once felt like an ending and now felt like the opening line of something else entirely. She was not, she decided, going to be the auditor who let a company's board decide what the truth was allowed to cost. On Saturday morning, she drove to a small print shop across town. Not her firm's office, not anywhere connected to Castellano and Wren, and made 3 notarized copies of her complete findings. The falsified logs, the Halcyon ownership trail, the beach house sale, Johan's recordings and internal emails. 1 copy she mailed to the SEC's whistleblower office. 1 she hand-delivered to a maritime law reporter at the Atlanta paper who had covered 2 prior shipping scandals with the kind of rigor that made companies nervous. The 3rd she kept. Then she called Diane. I'm not asking you to file it through the firm, she said. I understand the position you're in, and I'm not angry at you for having 40 people's jobs to think about. But I filed it myself this morning, outside the firm's name. If that costs me my job, I accept that. I need you to know I made that choice with clear eyes. There was a long pause on the line. And then, quietly, Diane said, send me a copy of everything you sent them. If this firm is going to survive what's coming, I'd rather survive it having done the right thing late than the wrong thing on time. The story broke on a Tuesday, and it broke fast. A maritime fraud scandal with a corporate villain, a paper trail 4 years deep, and, buried in paragraph 9 of every article, the detail reporters couldn't resist. The scheme had first been flagged internally by the company's own vice president, dismissed by his mentor as instability, and ultimately confirmed by an independent audit the mentor had personally tried to have quashed. Paul Ha did what men like him had always done when the walls closed in. He tried to control the narrative from inside it, calling an emergency board meeting to position himself as the concerned executive shocked by his own company's fraud. It might even have worked, had Johan not walked into that meeting with 6 months of recordings and a printed transcript of every conversation in which I had suggested, gently, repeatedly, that Johan's concerns be handled quietly. You called me unstable in March, Johan said, in a boardroom that had gone silent around him. The same room where he'd once been told to let the internal review handle it. You told the board I might be having a breakdown. You have that on a recording you didn't know existed, telling my cousin the same week that stability might require new leadership at the VP level. I have 4 years of your shell company's filings. I have the beach house. I have the buyer whose LLC dissolved 11 days after your sale closed. I would like the board to explain to me, in front of counsel, what part of this you'd like to characterize as concern for the company. Ha tried once to turn the room. This is exactly the instability I warned you about, he said, addressing the board rather than Johann. His voice pitched to the practiced warmth that had worked for 26 years. A young man, grieving his father, now entangled with the very auditor investigating his own company. Can we truly trust his objectivity in this moment? You can trust the recordings, Johann said, and pressed play on the transcript projected across the boardroom screen. Ha's own voice, dated 8 months earlier, suggesting to Johann's cousin that the board might want to consider whether Johann is equipped for this role much longer. The room went very quiet. Rin Zhang's flagged invoices came up next, cross-matched against Toby's halcyon ownership trail, and by the time the screen reached the Hilton Head title transfer, 3 board members who had known Paul Ha for 2 decades would not meet his eyes. Ha's composure, 26 years of it, did not survive the meeting. The board voted to remove Paul Ha within the hour, pending a full criminal referral that would, within the year, result in fraud and embezzlement charges spanning 3 states. His cousin, the quiet successor Ha had apparently been grooming, resigned 2 days later rather than face questions about what she had or hadn't known. Johann did not celebrate. Toby found him that evening on the loading dock of the G Group's Savannah port facility, watching the same vessels whose falsified logs had started all of it, being properly, finally, inspected by an independent firm his father would have trusted. I keep waiting to feel like it's over, he said, when she came to stand beside him. Instead, I mostly feel like I lost someone, which is insane, considering what he did. It's not insane, Toby said. You lost the version of him you needed to exist. That's a real loss, even if the man attached to it was never really who you thought. He looked at her then, really looked the way he had across a card table in a Snowden hotel lobby a lifetime ago. You could have let this go, you know. Diane gave you an out. Most people would have taken it. I spent a long time, Toby said, thinking I was the kind of woman things simply happened to. Turns out I'm the kind of woman who reads the fine print. She managed a small smile. You could have let it go too. Gone back to Seattle. Let someone else find it eventually. I got on the wrong flight on purpose in a way, he admitted. I told myself it was random. I don't think anything about that night was random. The SEC's investigation took 4 months to formalize into hearings, and Johann sat for 2 full days of deposition, walking federal investigators through every email, every quiet suggestion Hyde made about letting the internal review handle it. Every moment he had doubted his own judgment because the one man he trusted told him to. Toby sat in the gallery for none of it and all of it in spirit, barred as a witness from discussing testimony with him until both their depositions closed. She spent those 4 months building her own independent practice's first case file in the evenings, occasionally finding a single text waiting when she finished. Made it through today. Rin Zhang's invoices held up under cross-examination. Ha's counsel tried to argue the Hilton Head sale was coincidental timing. Nobody believed them. When it was finally Toby's turn to testify, she did what she had always done best. Laid the numbers out in order, refused to speculate past what the documents proved, and let the paper trail speak for itself in a room full of people who had spent careers learning to distrust exactly that kind of certainty. Ha's attorney tried, twice, to suggest her relationship with Johann compromised her findings. Both times, she pointed calmly to the fact that every figure in her report had been independently verifiable by anyone with access to public port authority records. She had simply been the first person willing to look. The federal fraud and embezzlement charges were filed the following spring. Paul Ha did not go to trial. Facing the full weight of Rin's invoices, Toby's ownership trail, and Johann's recordings, he took a plea that guaranteed prison time and, more importantly to Johann, a public admission on the record that G Group's young vice president had never once been the problem. Johann's mother, Grace G, summoned Toby to dinner 2 weeks after Paul Ha's removal. Not an invitation so much as a gentle, immovable expectation, delivered through Johann with visible nerves. She's not like Ha, he said on the drive over. She's direct. She'll ask you things Ha would have dressed up in flattery. I'd rather warn you than have you blindsided. Grace G lived in a house with a persimmon tree in the side yard. The same one, Toby realized, Johann had described that first night at the Magnolia, grown twice as tall as he'd made it sound. She served tea before dinner and asked, without preamble, "You are the one who found what Paul did?" "I am. My husband trusted that man more than he trusted his own brother," Grace said. "I want you to understand what you took from us was necessary and what you gave us was rare. Most people would have taken the quieter path your employer offered you." She studied Toby for a long moment. "My son tells me you met on an airplane that fell out of the sky for 6 minutes. "It didn't fall," Toby said. "It diverted." 6 minutes was just how long the decision took. Something in Grace's face softened. The first real warmth Toby had seen from her. "That is a very auditor answer. Precise. I like it." She poured more tea. "Sit. Eat. Tell me about your mother's porch." Johann mentioned the color she could never quite mix. The months that followed were not, Toby made clear from the beginning, a straight line back to the fireplace at the Magnolia Inn. "You lied to me about your name," she told him plainly, 3 weeks after the board meeting. Over coffee that was becoming a weekly, careful habit. "I understand why. I even forgive why. But understanding isn't the same as trusting. And I'm not going to pretend it is just because the truth turned out to be more sympathetic than I feared." "I know," Johann said. "I'm not asking you to skip that part. I just don't want to skip it alone." So they didn't skip it. He told her things in pieces over months, the way trust is actually rebuilt rather than the way it looks in movies. Not a single grand gesture but 100 small, unglamorous ones. He introduced her to his mother formally, as the auditor who saved his company, and only later, when it was true, as someone he was seeing. He turned down 2 board members' suggestions of a fresh start narrative that would have quietly written Toby out of the public account of what happened. He testified, when the SEC investigation required it, without once trying to minimize how long he'd let Ha's warnings keep him silent. Toby, for her part, left Castellano and Wren. Not in anger, but because Diane's late-in-the-day courage had cost the firm 2 major clients, and Toby no longer wanted to be the reason her partner's business bled out slowly. She started her own small compliance practice instead, 6 months later, with exactly one enormous, improbable first client on her roster, G Group, whose new independent board had insisted, over Johann's careful recusal from the decision, on hiring the auditor who'd actually done her job. "That's a conflict of interest," Toby told him, the day the contract landed on her desk. "It's a coincidence of good taste," Johann said. "The board picked you on merit. I recused myself from the vote entirely. I checked." "You checked." "I have gotten," he said, very serious about paper trails. Preston texted her once in October after her name appeared briefly, professionally, without a photo, in one of the follow-up articles about the G Group settlement. "Heard about the shipping thing. Didn't know you were doing such big cases now. Proud of you, T." She looked at the message for a long time before she answered it, turning over the version of herself he'd left in a mailbox letter. A woman he must have believed would fold quietly, the way she'd folded through most of that relationship, agreeing to smaller apartments and smaller dreams because keeping the peace had always felt safer than being right. "Thank you," she wrote back finally. "I am." She didn't say anything else, and he didn't ask for anything else, and that, she realized, setting the phone down, was the whole of the closure she'd ever actually needed. Not an apology, not an explanation, just the quiet proof that the woman who left that hotel in Candor a year ago was not the same one walking into board meetings now. A year to the week after a mechanical failure diverted a plane over the Georgia Hill Country, Johann asked Toby to take a long weekend with him. No explanation, just a request and a look on his face that told her not to ask too many questions. They landed, this time on purpose, at the same small regional airport, and Toby laughed out loud in the rental car when she realized where he was taking her. "Candor," she said. "You didn't. Miss Odell still runs the Magnolia. I called ahead. She remembers us. She says, and I'm quoting her directly, that she knew from the cards something was going on. The town looked different in June than it had under snow. Magnolia's actually in bloom along Main Street, the diner across from the inn doing brisk lunch business, the same hand-painted sign on the airport that had once told her, half-jokingly, that this was a place that kept its promises. They ate dinner that night in the same diner where, technically, they had never actually eaten together. A detail Johan pointed out with visible satisfaction as he steered her toward a corner booth by the window, the same window that looked out on the road toward the airport. "We never actually came here," Toby said, sliding into the booth. "We only ever talked about it. You said something about wanting real food that wasn't Hotel Coco." "I remember everything about that night," he said. "Every part of it. Which is why I wanted to finally finish it properly." She was still laughing about the technicality when he got down on one knee beside the booth, in front of the diner's dinner crowd and Miss Odell, who had apparently been let in on the plan and was already crying by the pie case, and asked her, with a small velvet box and hands that were not nearly as steady as they'd been in any boardroom, to marry him. "I got on the wrong flight and found the right life," he said. "I'd like 6 more minutes with you, and then a few thousand more after that, if you'll have me." They were married the following spring at the Magnolia Inn in a ceremony small enough that Miss Odell hosted it herself in the lobby with the same fireplace lit, though this time in April instead of a snowstorm. Toby's sister Aaliyah stood beside her, finally the one catching the bouquet instead of throwing it. Johan's mother sat in the front row beside Diane Castellano, who had flown down from Atlanta despite everything, because some debts, Toby had told her, were worth forgiving even when they weren't fully owed. There was a card table set up near the dessert spread, at Johan's specific request, with a hand-lettered sign in his own handwriting. "Geo Stop Tournament? Winner gets the last slice of cake." Miss Odell won, twice, and told anyone who'd listen that she'd known exactly how this story would end from the very first hand. Later, on the inn's porch, watching the last of the guests wind their way down toward the road, Toby leaned into her husband's shoulder and thought about 6 minutes. How short a length of time it actually was, and how completely it had managed, twice now, to change the entire shape of her life. "Regrets?" Johan asked, catching her looking at him. "None," she said. "Statistically unlikely, given how we started. But none." He laughed, low and easy, the sound of a man who had finally stopped being watched by anyone he didn't trust. "I told you 6 minutes was usually fine. You said statistically. I've since revised my numbers," he said, and kissed her. There on the porch of the only hotel in a town called Candor, which had, against every reasonable expectation, kept its promise after all. Inside, Miss Odell was already gathering up the go-stop cards for another round, calling out that the winner tonight got the last slice and nobody was allowed to let the groom win out of politeness. Somewhere behind them, Grace G. was showing Aaliyah a photograph of the persimmon tree in full fruit, insisting she come see it before the season ended. Diane Castellano stood near the porch railing with a glass of the same blackberry wine Miss Odell had once poured for 10 stranded strangers, watching the 2 people whose case had cost her firm 2 clients and given her, in exchange, the clearest conscience she'd had in a decade. Toby stood a moment longer on the porch steps, her husband's hand in hers, and let herself simply notice it all. The magnolias, the fireplace glow through the window, the particular quality of a life that had once seemed derailed and had instead, 6 minutes at a time, found its way exactly where it was supposed to land. The end. Thank you for watching this Afro-K Tales original. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes love always finds its way home. New stories every